before with CWIO with this project? I can't remember. Yeah, can't remember.
So that would be,
Can't remember if I had Aaron do this on my behalf or I. Okay. How are we looking online? All right, we're good. All right, hi everyone. For those who weren't here back in the day, my name's Ian Smith. I'm with the Seneca Watershed IO. Isaac's equivalent in about, what, 8 feet away through a very thin wall. So we get to hear each other's conversations frequently, so I'm aware of what's going on with CWIO more than I probably should. This is a project not creatively named, so you can probably guess what this is going to be about. Seneca and Cayuga Road Drainage Assessment Project. This is the first phase. So this is the, I'll just jump right into it. So acknowledgements right off the bat. This project is funded principally by New York State Department of State through the local waterfront revitalization program. The way this program works, Department of State, obviously, they're unique in that they allow, one, they're only open to municipalities. Hence why I have Town of Fayette up here, because they're serving as the project applicant for this this effort. And they're handy for us, especially here, because the U.S. is one of the few agencies that allow for planning, design, and implementation, and you can phase that out. So with that advantage in mind, we sort of conceived of this as a multi-phase effort, where in this initial phase, we're just looking at the planning, and depending on what we discover during the planning process, maybe some engineering design work is a component. And the second phase will ultimately be implementation work. If we get into the background of why we're doing this, of course, I'm going to be a little biased here. This does include both of our watersheds, but I'm much more familiar with my side. So if we go into the 90 for the Seneca and Cayuga watershed, we have a list of a bunch of different practices and BMPs we prescribe that can improve and protect water quality in Seneca Lake. And of course, now that you have the glorious CWIO finally approved, I'm sure you have something very similar to what we have listed here, some of the actions that can be done to reduce phosphorus to the lake. So here we have reduce flow velocities and promote sedimentation within road ditches. Through installation of check dams specifically called out, but any other prescribed practice that may either reduce the velocity flow within a ditch or promote sedimentation either through inhibiting its formation to begin with or having it fall out prior to reaching the stream. So that's the goal of what we're trying to get to here. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can go about this. I don't know if anyone's, I recognize, I forget your name, but definitely from Soil and Water from down in Portland, right? Sean, that's right. So there are definitely a lot of approaches, and a lot of the soil and water districts do needed triage, right? So we get a big storm, a culvert gets washed out, or it gets washed out. Go out with the highway departments and try to rectify that before it causes a road accident. But we're kind of going at a different approach here. We're trying to identify problems before they form. So that's kind of how we're looking at this from a planning perspective. So we're trying to quantify prioritization. And the idea for this sort of came out sort of from an effort they did over in Owasco before I even came on board, so more than 5 years ago, where they went out and assessed the road drainage network throughout the Owasco Lake watershed. And they kind of quantified it to try to gauge the level of importance to address. I wanted to take it a step further and make it more mechanistic. This was more just like a visual assessment. Is it steep? Yes, no, high steepness, low steepness. Actually give it more teeth so we could be more comparative. And the reason for that is in our side of the watershed, we have over 2,000 miles of road. And I'm sure it's equivalent over here, or at least. So at some point when you're talking about planning at that scale, 700 square miles or more, it's like, you can't put a grant together for $10 million or $20 million to do a bunch of road work. You got to target it and kind of find a way to prioritize where you're going to focus your effort. That's kind of what we're trying to do here at the most basic level. We're also changing an approach. We're looking at sub-basins, so entire drainage connections between ditches and culverts. So you can think of, let's say a storm comes out, washes out a culvert, you replace it. It's down, what's the road out here? Is this 80? I drove down, I should know, 89? 89. You replace a culvert under 89, right? You get it right size so it doesn't happen again. Well, if you don't address anything upstream of it, do you risk just losing it again? That's happened a couple times by our office in Geneva. I think they've replaced the same culvert by Kirk Road 3 times in 3 years. So we're trying to get to a point where we can prioritize by entire drainage network so that we can replace everything within that entire network. And of course, the ultimate goal is to not just do planning, but actually get to implementation. So the next phase will actually put a prescription of the BMPs that need to be installed based on our assessment for an entire drainage basin, then go in after implementation dollars. That's a principal implementation focus, but this has a secondary goal where we're looking for opportunities to establish easements to either increase additional storage off the drainage network or things like that, where we may be able to find additional opportunities. We're trying to make it so that they're easy opportunities for updating the assessment so we can constantly reprioritize. We've developed a fairly simplistic survey tool that any municipal highway staff can go out. If they're going to do some work, we can update our assessment going forward, and instantly, if there's another round of funding, we can put together a new package with the data we have available. It also serves for the 9E or the TMDL tracking towards our goals as we do implementation. And then finally, it is a useful tool for outreach, because I'm sure like we get a lot of questions of what are you actually doing around the watershed, so we can actually point to stuff that we're doing as we go along. The actual project deliverables for this are the assessment, which I'll get into in detail in this presentation, because that's largely what we're focusing on in the majority of the effort. Implementation strategy. So we're working with Seneca Soil and Water. They're actually, once the assessment's done, they'll actually go back and put together a laundry list of the actual BMPs that need to be installed for the areas we prioritize, so we can then go to implementation, or if need be, get some engineering design work done. And then finally, an outreach tool so that people can access our findings, our updates, things like that. I'm going to skip the timeline because we're way off time. Okay. So our assessment methodology, how do we prioritize segments? We've gone back and forth a lot of this, and it's actually not even set in stone yet. We've had a lot of input from highway department staff, soil and water districts, DOT, other individuals who have a good handle on how they do work around this and how we might integrate that into our assessment. We've sort of settled on 4 criteria. So we have the drainage basin element. So we can think of the water from the adjacent landscape into any road drainage network, typically a road, but depending on the slope of the terrain, it includes, a field, a forest, parking lot, whatever it might be. So we're using land use assessment data to look at stormwater runoff into the network. I'm gonna come back to this one a little bit. We were using phosphorus loading based on the output from the TMDL and the 90, but we're coming back around to that. Actually may abandon that as an element in our assessment methodology. And then the principal focus, the actual components of the ditch itself. So what kind of velocity control is there within the ditch, if any? And then what sort of pollutant loaded is emanating from the ditch, if any? And then a couple different components we've gone back and forth on as well. And I'll take any input on all this because we still haven't finalized it. We were looking at sort of the density of the drainage network within a basin. So how many miles of drainage network are there relative to the drainage area? And then also weighting factor. So do we weigh all of these criteria equally, or do we favor one versus another, or some versus another? All right, so talking about the drainage the basin characteristics of runoff into the network. So we've got velocity or the amount, the quantity of water going into the drainage basin, or drainage network, I should say. The reason we're looking at this is obviously if you have more runoff into a ditch, you have higher velocities and higher volumes, and ultimately the receiving water can be negatively impacted by those quantities of water, usually resulting in stream bank erosion. So we wanted to get a handle on exactly what are the capacities of a ditch network to handle runoff, or how pressured is it to runoff. And we're not trying to get at an actual, let's just say right off the bat, we're making it quantifiable, but this is not a model. We're not saying this is how much volume is receiving into the ditch. We're trying to assess, like, relative to another, is one less stable? Is it more susceptible to, is it getting higher volumes of runoff than a comparable one? So we're using a very basic method, referred to as a rational method. It's been used in the past to estimate discharge. And you'll see it's this pointer working? Sorry, I'm colorblind, so it's a little hard to tell sometimes. Maybe not. So it did? Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah, I cannot see it on the screen. So I'll just pretend I'm pointing at 101 pointer. So you can see these factors here, CIA. It's the C is what we call runoff coefficient. So it's based on the landscape within that basin controls that, and that's really the factor that we're looking at. You can see by the table, its coefficient changes based on things like the soil type, how erodible is your soil, the slope of the landscape. Obviously, the more steeply sloped it is, the easier water runs off into a surface water or a ditch. And then, of course, the land use composition changes the landscape's ability to absorb the rainfall. So obviously, the more susceptible it is, the more we have to worry about runoff. So that's the quantity side of it. Now, the quality side, phosphorus in particular that we're focusing on, right? Because that's what both R90 and the Teamdale focus on. We originally were using the SWAP model output from the 90 and the TMDL. We've gone back and forth on this, and I think after some input from some people, I think we're actually pulling this out from our assessment methodology, from at least the perspective of the implementation side of it, of specifically ditch work and culvert. The reason we've kind of gone around to this is there's just not a huge capacity within with a road drainage network or culvert, obviously, to sequester phosphorus that's running off into it. So you can't think of it as like a retention basin or a wetland that has that capacity. We still did the analysis, partly because we thought we were going to include it initially, and partly because we're also interested in looking at that where we think there might be concentrations of phosphorus in road drainage runoff so that we could do some of the other things we're looking at. But as far as actual consideration of road ditch improvements, we've actually pulled that out of the assessment. And then the more important thing is like the ditch itself. What are the velocity control structures of inside of the ditch? And then what are the pollutant loads from the ditch itself? So within the ditch, again, more complicated equations here that I can't tell if I'm pointing at, but Mann's equation basically looks at the velocity of water through a conveyance. So you can think of it, treating a ditch is sort of like a pipe in this instance. One of the controlling factors is roughness, and the other one that we're looking at is slope. You can see here's some examples. Obviously, a smooth surface, like smooth concrete, doesn't do much to inhibit velocity down a ditch, but if you have check dams or I don't know, rock line, or vegetation is really good too, actually. You can see that in there. That slows down the velocity within the ditch a lot. And then the other side of it, the pollutant load, we used Russell, which is actually the underlying structure to a SWAP model. It's a soil, what does it stand for? Universal soil loss equation. So we're looking here. This is very simplistic. So didn't say Russell. Region 5 is an EPA model that also uses Russell. We're using it as our actual calculation because it's Excel and very simple. But the controlling factor is what we call the lateral recession rate. Basically, what is the existing condition, the erosion within a channel? Do you see like incising or bare slopes or bank cutting, things like that? And it's just a visual assessment. That's the best we can get at. But those are sort of the quantification tools that we're using for within our assessment methodology. And then culverts is the second side of this. Obviously, they're interlinked. And this is a little different, and because we can't quantify the load or velocity control in and of itself, at least that I'm aware of. I don't know if anyone else has some ideas. So we're using more of a visual assessment for the culvert side of it, and we're still struggling to figure out how to prioritize them either together or independently. So again, the idea is an entire basin, right, which includes both open ditch channels and a culvert. But we're trying to figure out how to integrate those together ideally. We just don't know if we can ever quite do that yet. So we're still working on those kinks on the culvert side of it. Here's where we are right now. So we started, when did we start this? 2 summers ago. This has proven to be a lot more time consuming than we anticipated, probably because we weren't able to bring on. Well, we lost Aaron right when the first round of fieldwork was going to start, and then our hoped for intern never materialized. So our staff of 3 went down to a staff of 1. Right, being in a district during the summer around here is not very much fun. So obviously very systematic, starting down one side. We're now working our way, and this is a little dated now. I think we're up to, I can't tell exactly here, but I think we've wrapped around here and we're in this up 12 now. So maybe 75% of mapping the entire road drainage network on both sides of Seneca County that drain into either Seneca or Cayuga Lake, over 200 miles. So we've probably got about maybe 150 miles left to go. I'm hoping to get that done by the end of the calendar year. It's looking pretty good. We'll see, no promises. And then sort of as an idea of what this will look like in the end. Sure, go ahead.
Yes, we're talking about your graphic. No, go back to the other one.
Oh, that one?
No,
that one.
Yeah. Is that color coded?
Yes, I'll get into it right now. Yep. Yeah, so this is ultimately what the output will look like. So remember again, we talked about one of the factors we're looking at as surface runoff from the contributing basin. This is an analysis for the prioritization around just that factor. So what's the volumetric runoff into these drainage networks from these subbasins? So we break this all down into all of our defined subbasins that we're prioritizing around. And this is basically a ranking. I forget exactly how many, you should know that off my head. I forget how many we have, but these are all equal distribution. So dark red is what the assessment says. These have the highest runoff potential into the road drainage network within that subbasin. So they're receiving more runoff from their basin relative to these other ones. So red's got the highest, then pink, then color blindness again. Look at this. I think that's yellow. That's green. So I mean, it makes sense, right? This is kind of somewhat intuitive. You can see these here, green. That's a lot of national forest property, fairly flat at the top right, or heavy forest canopy up there. Versus, I mean, you get down here, and I was just over here. It's straight down, developed into either agricultural roads or whatever it might be. So it has a lot more high susceptibility to run. But this is what we'll have for each component, right? So velocity control and basically pollutant loading from the ditch itself. And then we can blend them all together to generate this for everything. And that will be our prioritization, right? Then we can take that, the soil and water, and they can go through, okay, our budget is $1 million. I think we can do these 7 or 8 subbasins completely. Let's go out and do it. That's the idea behind phase 1, right? And then phase 2, obviously, depending on their scope of work for what needs to be done, we'll go ask for those dollars to do that. That's sort of where we're getting at here. I'm hoping, I feel like we're about halfway there, especially if I can drag Isaac out more in the cold. We'll get through it. We'll get through it by the end of next year. That is true. At least there's no plants to walk through and poison ivy to deal with. Yeah.
You have multiple colors there.
Yeah.
Would you explain why red is more steep, or it's other stuff looks like it's kind of flat and same level, and the green looks like it's the top of the hill, but there's another green, yellow. What's more, red is more sensitive. What makes it different?
So the factors that go on into this, right? So again, I'll get a little nerdy here for a second. So our mathematical equation for quantifying this element, runoff susceptibility, is the coefficient of runoff. So that includes factors like land use, slope, and soil. Then you have the intensity, which is static, the rainfall intensity, that's static, and then the area, so the size of the drainage basin. So it's a mix of things. So soil type, if you have a soil type that's resistant to soil loss, they can handle a lot more rain even if it's steep, right? Or conversely, if you have a lot of impervious surface, like Ithaca, obviously, you're gonna have all that water that's falling on the landscape is gonna go right into a stormwater network of some kind, or road ditch, depending on if you got an open ditch. So it varies from each catch basin, each sub-basin. It depends on what's going on there. Yeah, I mean, some of them you have to know more about to really get it. You have to have an intuitive understanding of what's going on there to get to sort of understand why it's going on. This one's pretty straightforward because we know it's the national forest up there, so that's an easy one to pick out, and it's flat up there. So those two factors make it less susceptible to runoff formation. Some of these other ones, though, they really would. I don't know this side of the drainage that well, unfortunately. But up here, it's a combination of heavy conversion of landscape, even though it's flat up here in Fayette. You've got a lot of conversion of landscape. You've got highly erodible soils. And those two factors, even though it's flat, make it comparatively susceptible to lots of runoff. Yeah, hopefully that's the end product for phase one, right? It includes all of the quantification. Which if we can figure out how to integrate culverts into it quantifiably, that might be a little challenging.
So, I have a question.
Yeah.
So is it an artifact of funding that the piece along the canal between the two lakes is not included?
Yes.
Well, that's
So the LWRP program is only open to it's designed around priority water bodies. So in lake waters include all the Finger Lakes, but the canal is not part of the Finger Lakes, so it's still not included in those. So we couldn't do work drain into the canal. Yeah, that's also why I should have said this. It's also why our assessment does not. You can actually probably kind of see it. Yeah, see, like these stop right around Ovid doesn't include the villages because we can't do. Well, there's a couple of reasons why we don't include the villages, but one of them is local waterfront revitalization programs is only open to municipalities that border those water bodies. And none of the villages in Seneca County do. There are fundamental reasons too, because then you start to get into buried stormwater systems, and it becomes impossible to easily tell where water's going. So, yeah.
Thank you. Just in case you're confused, our map for CWIO does include that area. And we talked about that when we made that decision to map it and include it with USGS and some of the flow monitoring data that they did. Depending on lockages, water can move from the canal at a pretty good clip as far down as that railroad trestle. So it can sometimes be part of our watershed. So we adopted it. So don't be confused if that's on our map, because it is sort of in a watershed. The state just doesn't agree with us. Yeah. Any other questions? Any online questions?
Yes.
I think that visualization map is terrific, and I know we were working with CSI and the network on a visualization map and things for the grant for that too, just because it's so easy for people to, get the concept of where the problems are. So I commend you for this work. It seems like it'll be really useful. And I'm wondering, so with your soil and water district, are you having, have they seen the outcome of your work yet? And you'll be working really very closely with them to figure out, okay, now we have this, what can we do with it? And will it, sorry, what's going on? Will it help with grant funding if you have this kind of identification of the problem areas that you could get more points because you have this?
So I didn't mention that as a justification for doing this planning level initially. But one of the things that seems to be coming out of FEMA now is documentation of pre-existing conditions for a lot of their emergency response. in emergency dollars. So that was a big reason. We've actually photo documented everything as we've gone along. I'm not sure how useful that's actually going to be, but there's been conversations that FEMA is going to require documentation of pre-existing, like if a culvert gets washed away and you get FEMA assistance for flood response, whatever they call it. I don't know. Aaron, did you have to show what the conditions before were to get dollars to replace it? So that's certainly one useful thing. Obviously, this is going to directly lead into a next phase through the same program we intend to apply to do implementation. I should say the district is a partner on this. They're under this as well. So Alex McGraw is doing the visual assessment of the condition of the ditch. So the LRR, the lateral recession rate stuff. He's doing all of that. And they're doing all of the E&P prescriptions because that's their avenue. That's what they do. So it just makes sense to use that existing capacity, right? And then, yeah, as far as other grants, yeah, you could use it, sure. I mean, there are other existing programs out there. The districts use. I mean, John, you could speak on this. I mean, the districts use. I think it's WQIP principally that funds a lot of culvert work the districts employ, and CWIO County uses it a ton. But this is just another avenue, right? So if you're going to use DOS, they have for better or worse, right? They fund planning, but they also like a higher level planning requirement than some of the other funding opportunities. So, and there's also, I didn't get into it in our culvert assessment, but there's aquatic connectivity stuff out there at the federal level. That's an avenue we haven't explored a ton on either side of the watershed, I think. Although Cayuga County Soil and Water's done a lot of that actually. But we haven't used it much in our watershed. So that's a fun opportunity we could explore now that we have this pre-existing need. So yeah, it supports directly into the same program, but also potentially other programs, right? And one of the things that I'm really interested in the DOS on this conversation. I don't think Kate's in this conversation. We've been making little notes as we go along around, here's an example. So if you're familiar with, what is it called? Trapehagen Road in Lodi. It's a dirt road. It starts on Forest Service land, comes down towards Seneca Lake. The highway department, the highway department kind of took the flow off of that entire road. Instead of discharging it directly across the street into its original channel, for whatever reason, they didn't want to do that. And they sent it 90 degrees down so Trapehagen Road goes east-west. They turned it 90 degrees, sent it north, and then across the road into a completely different drainage, right? So in looking at this, the presumed drainage basin, these things, well, you can see them there too, but like, I think it's this one right here, actually. So actually, this drainage basin, if you use GIS, that's what it comes out as. But there's actually a portion of this basin over here that's also draining into that basin. So we know that there's an excessive amount of water being carried in to that stream now. So there's an opportunity to potentially put in some extra storage capacity to mitigate stream bank erosion into that stream. So I've been kind of logging those as we go along. And I mean, Isaac, I'm sure I can send you my list for over here too. I don't want to step on your toes, but there's stuff, I'm sure there's stuff all over here, that little potential pockets where you could do other stuff. And the nice thing about all of these potential areas for work is you can get an easement right next to a road, easy access, easy maintenance for a BMP, hopefully by municipality, right? So there's all sorts of direct applications for this work, but then secondary applications too. That was a really long answer. Yeah. Okay.
So how would not only would soil and water be want to be involved in this, but highway departments that seem like would be really good to connect with. So are there avenues to get this information out there? Highway departments saying, hey, this happened, it's like that's in your municipality, if you want to put some effort into this. I mean, because they have budgets that they can use without any grants to do some of the work. But I didn't know like that hard outreach to do to the.
So I'm gonna ignore the last part of that statement. I'll say right off the bat, we got support letters from every highway superintendent in the county to do this work. So they're aware of it. They're right on board. They're like, hey, if you can get money for us to do some work, we're in game. And then this program, like pretty much every state program, requires a local match. So that highway staff time and that equipment is, you know, when we get to the invitation side and we ask for $1 or $1.5 million to do work, the way we're going to get to that match is through municipal highway assistance, either equipment and time, right? That's the only way we can do that, because none of these municipalities are going to fork out $100K to get our match to do work, right? So they're involved.
Just in response to that, the Outlook program that does the ditch remediation work actually pays the 25% match. And then soil and water, the rest of it comes from a grant from that. So it's a soil and water grant. And then we relieve the townships by paying them. And we've done that through grants that we paying mostly local foundations. So there are different avenues to it. And some towns respond better than others.
Yeah, and I'll say that this phase of the project is all matched from myself, from Soil and Water District staff, and then stole some time from Isaac and Aaron too. And then of course the contribution from CWIO. Yeah.
I had a question, but I forgot it.
Yeah.
Not terribly important. I'm curious. The culvert washed out 3 times. You said there's something up above. What was it up above and how did you?
It's so what caused it? I don't know. I haven't done an assessment. That's Ontario County. Haven't gotten there yet. Do have funds to add into this though, so that's exciting. I don't know, but usually the easiest thing to get permitted to do is to replace it with what was there before. That's the quickest and easiest way to do it. So my assumption is there's more capacity in that road ditch than it was designed for initially. I mean, I don't think it's breaking news that we're seeing some changes in rainfall patterns, right? So like what was designed for a culvert when it was put in initially, does that design standard still apply? I don't think so. So that's the principal reason in my opinion. So if we get around to doing an updated analysis of, you know, design flow and what it should be sized to for a 25-year storm, they'll probably come out a different size.
That's like a phase 3 project, phase 2.
You gotta have a stamp for that, so you gotta find money for that side of it. Gotta have an engineering stamp for that work.
I'll go away, I ran it down. But I thought of a question and another one. So follow up on that question. Do you think some of the new funding around climate resiliency will allow flexibility to upsize infrastructure?
We're specifically talking about this kind of infrastructure, like a culvert in a ditch.
Stormwater conveyance, yeah.
Yeah, but that's touchy, right? If you make a pipe too big, it won't clean itself out. You'll get a clog, or it won't convey the way you want it to. So, yes.
And are you then gonna go through and upsize every single
Right.
on that road, or are you just gonna upsize the one that blows out? Where you really need to go through and
Exactly.
make it all uniform.
And right, that's what we're trying to do here, right? It's like, can we get the biggest problem? The biggest problem is driveway culverts and private culverts. Right? We can't use, to my knowledge, we certainly can't use DOS dollars to do replacement of private culverts. And you can't force someone to do it. If it was approved already and, you know, their permit, then it's there. Maybe if it gets washed out, you can convince them to change it. But that's the biggest weakness, unfortunately. I mean, there's not much we can do about that.
One more. So back to your example on, that road where they moved the water from one basin to another, which is not that uncommon, I
No.
guess.
Yeah.
I don't. I get the sense from some of Rebecca Schneider's presentations that that just was a factor that wasn't really considered much in the past, maybe still not always considered, but we are maybe getting a bigger awareness of how that could cause problems.
Mhm.
So when you prioritize these basins, will you suggest any places like that, putting the water back into the basin it comes from? Because it's involved around that flow, you don't want to dry one up and stress another one. Is that an opportunity that you'll pursue?
Possibly, I think the biggest challenge there is gonna be right of ways. Of course, the municipality has the authority, or the state or county, whoever controls the road, has the authority to put something under there. But where it outlets is gonna be a factor, right? Sometimes it was moved because there was no place to outlet. Maybe there's a road across the way. In this case, there wasn't. But maybe there's a house directly across the way and you don't want to discharge it into someone's house, obviously. So it'd probably be, again, right, that once we generate this part, the district can go back out and prescribe the best BMPs for the prioritized segment. So if they're going out, it's like, oh yeah, this segment is, I don't know, this culvert needs to be upsized, this road ditch needs to be hydroseeded, this drainage needs to be realigned, or whatever it might be, that could be something that comes out of it. Yeah.
So now that you've gone through the pain of getting all this equation together and being able to, produce a map like this, how hard is it going to be for us to do the rest of the people? I mean, is it like how expandable is this area?
Right. The idea here was to be replicatable. Again, and quantifiable. So all the factors that we've used to generate this sort of thing is replicable across the watershed. I mean, this is just GIS data. I mean, that's obviously available for everywhere. The trickiest part beyond the just time to go out and map it is a lot of communities don't even know where. So Erin Perazini did a culvert assessment for Seneca County back in, what did she tell me, 96, right? So almost 30 years. And we used that initially as like, oh, how much do culverts change? You know, not that much, but I'd say at least 20% of them don't exist anymore. And there are way more new ones that either were missed or just weren't there historically. So all that information is you got to go out and collect, right, to make it comparable. But yeah, I mean, you could replicate it anywhere else. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to vary, right? How much pre-existing information is available? I think Angel said she did a complete culvert assessment in Tompkins County, and like on our side, Gates County did that 2 years ago. So it's pretty updated. Yeah, the ditch side of it, the most time-consuming part is knowing where one is and isn't, and where it flows to or does not. That information is what's really the largest lack in existing information. So, but some places might have. Yeah, I just don't. Yeah, I don't know. Right.
Thank you so much. Ian.
Sure.
That's exciting. Thank you. I would this is a long meeting.
We'll see. I promise to change that. Especially if you got to stuff up on the floor.